Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to the Fort Worth Masonic podcast. We're very happy to have you tuning in again. My name is Gabe Jagush, and I am a past master and the sitting marshal of Fort Worth Lodge.
And I am Billy Hamilton. I am a past master of Fort Worth 148 Lodge.
Today, we have a special guest with us.
I'm Adam Kendall. I'm a past master of Phoenix Lodge number 144 in San Francisco and an affiliate member of Benicia Lodge in Benicia, California.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on to the podcast, Adam. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We have a Phoenix Lodge not too far from us, actually.
Oh, excellent.
And I think I may have actually visited that lodge because when I was out in San Francisco for work, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I stopped out there. Is it a Masonic center that from the doorsteps, you can see the bay, and inside, well, this is probably going to describe about 80% of Masonic lodges out there, but there's like wood paneling.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess you can see the bay from the building. I mean, if you were to walk down the street and look straight down Terraval, but it's over in what technically might be, it's near the West Portal District. It's on the corner of 14th and Terraval at the Golden Gate Masonic Temple.
Okay.
It's an interesting building. It's got lots of weird twists and turns and staircases. It was originally not for Masonic use. It was built in the early 20th century and was originally used for the Knights of Columbus. And then at one point, I may have my history all messed up, but Golden Gate Speranza Lodge ended up buying the building, and several lodges have over the years occupied the building.
Okay.
And now it's occupied by Golden Gate Lodge and also Phoenix 144.
Wow, what a coincidence, because I remember I was talking to the worshipful master at dinner, and we were talking about our Masonic past, and I was initiated in Lawton, which is the town adjacent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And it turned out that he was a field artillery captain. And so it was like an instant connection right there. He's like, Fort Sill, where the ground thunders and God creates lightning in the sky from the field artillery.
Right. Great. Well, I'm glad you had a visit to us. I'm trying to think of what it was 8 years ago. We were just, when we were talking about the pandemic, it's created a sort of a memory fugue.
Yeah.
So I just don't know where I was at any point anymore.
Yeah, I remember I was out there for, I think it was a Microsoft Developers Conference that was happening downtown.
Well, you were far away from downtown.
Yeah, no, I had
San Francisco miles, that is.
Yeah, I had rented a car. Actually, that was back before Uber was really the huge thing it became.
Right. Yep. Well, even though I'm back in the Bay Area now, I moved to LA for a spell for about 4.5 years and came back up a few years ago. And now I live in the North Bay, actually, in Vallejo, which is just north of Oakland. For those of you who are interested, there is an old naval base there, Mare Island. It has an incredible history, and that's part of the whole really interesting history of the Bay Area, which I'm sure we can get into a little bit later on. That's sort of been my driving force. Really, it's always interesting in Freemasonry when we meet other brothers, and that's one of the great beauties of the fraternity is that we could not only meet brothers we may not have met otherwise, but we have this connection. We may not be bound by blood or even from the same area, the same region, but we visit each other's lodges and it creates that link between us. And so we have a center point that we can meet in. So you visited my lodge in San Francisco, and I don't know how much you talked to some of the brothers. You told me one of the brothers was in the military and you had that connection with Oklahoma and et cetera. But the lodge I was initiated in originally, well, it's Phoenix Lodge 144, but it was a merger between Oriental 144 and Paul Revere 462. And both lodges have their own histories, their own San Francisco histories, and Oriental especially because it's an older lodge. It has the lower number. Some very famous San Franciscans or people who came to San Francisco were affiliated with it, such as the famous orator Thomas Starr King, who's credited with keeping California in the Union. He was a staunch advocate for the Union, a great supporter of Abraham Lincoln, and really bent over backwards to convince the denizens of California. This is during the early part of the American period and the Civil War is breaking out. California has a lot of Southern sympathizers, Confederates, and to keep the Union together. And he is often credited with that. So we're very, very proud of his membership. He was called the Silver-Tongued Orator. And then John Sweat, who is considered to be the father of California's public school system. He was a member of that lodge. And then Paul Revere has its own history in the early 20th century. And so without going through that entire history, but being in a lodge really for me sparked or it didn't awaken it because I already had this kind of passion for the history of fraternal organizations, but also the fraternal organizations within my own locale. I grew up in part of my maternal side comes from a very old California family. They came to California in 1841 and built an adobe in what is now Vacaville. And we had a land grant that we had acquired that was signed by Michelet-Terrain, and we had procured it from Mariano Vallejo or Vallejo. We call it Vallejo over here. And the town that I live in is named after him. And so this was all his land at one time. So my family is essentially, they were homesteaders, they're rancheros, and they were there to basically populate that part of that region. And there's a whole host of reasons for those land grants being given out. And that is part of my own family history. And I'm very interested in California history. I'm interested in history in general. But so the history of fraternal organizations in the American period in California is also part of that interest in history. So from a very early age, I was always fascinated with the past. My big thing when growing up, I was absolutely entranced by ancient Egypt and devoured all sorts of literature on it. And of course, there's plenty to devour, right? And then also the ancient cultures of the Near East, Mesopotamia, Greece, Crete, etc. I was very interested in mythology. And so that really translated well later on in life. When I was very young, I wanted to be an archaeologist. That didn't work out. I took a circuitous path, but I did come back home and I do have a graduate degree in history. And it sounds strange, but when I was in graduate school, I made most of my subjects around the idea of these fraternal organizations and their importance in various communities and how they were instrumental in being part of the cement of these early societies. So that's me in a nutshell. I mean, I've done other things in life. I've traveled quite a bit. I've been involved in the arts so I didn't spring out of Freemasonry whole cloth, but from a very early age, I had a very favorable opinion of it. I was not in DMLA, but my father's best friend, his father's best friend's father, it was a Mason, and he admired this person. And so he'd always kind of talk about Freemasonry, especially if it popped up in a movie, such as I don't know if you've ever seen it, Murder by Decree with Christopher Plummer, Donald Sutherland, David Hemming. It's about Sherlock Holmes chasing after Jack the Ripper. So I know that's been done a couple times, and it's actually based off of a very infamous book that was published years ago, and it's where the basic plot line from Hell came from. So that would come up, and he's like, "Oh, the Freemasons." And we talk a little bit about it, and he was interested in secret societies, etc. But I was the only one in the family, really, for many generations to become a Mason. We did find a really it's not a very good copy, and it was found on some ancestry.com website of a relative on my, like a great great grandfather on my mother's side, who had been, after he came from Germany, he went down to Mexico, and he was in full Rose Croix regalia. I don't know what jurisdiction he belonged to, probably somewhere in Mexico. He was down in Baja del Sur. And so it could be any jurisdiction. But
Right.
I found that was new, because all I knew, and it was the Masons were on my dad's side. My uncle, the legendary Uncle Clarence, who I never met, but he was a Mason, and I guess that's me in a nutshell for early years.
All right.
But my fascination with fraternal organizations has, I guess you could say, it served me well, because I do study them, and primarily Freemasonry, and there is much to study, and it's enabled me to work in the fraternity for several decades. Is there any other questions you have regarding that?
No, I mean, that's fascinating. And it's interesting too, because there is this connection, well, this traditional romantic connection between Freemasonry and Egypt. So hear that your interests lie in that direction. I think it creates that connection. I know myself, actually, it was reading about Egyptian architecture that brought me to Masonry. I read a book called The Magic of the Obelisks. And it turned out to actually not be what I thought it would be about. I checked it out from my public library back when libraries were still more of a thing than they are today. And in there, it ended up being about the men who went to Egypt, and they actually took the obelisks that were in Egypt and they brought them to Rome or Paris or New York, London, what have you. And they talked about every single one of these guys, the main engineers and architects that were involved in these massive monumental movement projects were all Masons.
Yeah. And that actually colored a lot of the legends around what the Egyptians did. That's one of my big interests, is a sort of looking into how people receive history, how they interpret history. And so I have a sad disclaimer for everybody, is I do not advocate the origin theory of Freemasonry in Egypt. But where it comes from is when Egypt becomes a sort of a country in Europe. It's colonized by Europe at a very early time. I mean, this is before it's called Europe, of course, but the Greeks and Romans were there. And then when the Northern Europeans started arriving, the French and the English, et cetera, there was a huge Egyptomania is almost eternal as they are, as an ancient civilization. And there's all sorts of crazy ideas about who the Egyptians were. And indeed, it is a discipline, Egyptology. Fraternal organizations are interesting because, and I'm going to paraphrase from Jan Assmann, who is an Egyptologist, where one of his critiques on secret societies is that they seem to have been left behind in the growth of archaeology and Egyptology and any kind of ology. Science has passed them by, and they hold on to these antiquated ideas of their origin stories, these ritual histories. But at the same time, these historians and Egyptologists and et cetera have also kind of disregarded these organizations because they think that their origin stories are silly. But they're part of that continuum, that memory of what Egyptomania or Egyptophilia, the love of Egypt, is, and how that has shaped the country, or shaped the history of Egypt and ancient Egypt just as much as the actual history. So it's perception versus reality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I articulated that well. I can do better next time.
No, I think you got it.
But I
So,
am
but
in
Egypt
that,
and the idea of Egypt.
yeah, I am interested in how people perceive these cultures. We do not, as an organization, need to be 3,000, 3,500 years old to be valid. And you'd be hard pressed to figure out what actually comes from that period if you are to believe that. But it's people's ideas and translating their hopes and fears and concerns, their contemporary ideas, through those ancient ideals and making an entirely new reality. So it is the imaginary Egypt, or the imaginary Greece. There's a lot of romanticism, and that can be played up. That can be used to our advantage. If I've often said in some of my presentations that Freemasonry, I can't remember where I read it, but if it contains what is best of humanity, then why not draw inspiration from these great building nations such as Egypt or Mesopotamia or the civilizations of the Levant? Why not? Because it fills us with inspiration. It doesn't have to come from there. And I'd be the first to say that if you said that there would be a third degree in an Egyptian style room, I'm there, because you could fill yourself with the perception of the past, the vibe, rather than having to believe that it's all real. So that's one of my interests, and how these organizations are perceived all throughout the years, and how they perceive themselves. And you really can look at really get into that by looking at your own local histories, your own Masonic records, which are directly tied to your civic history. It's so important. We do, as Masons, talk a lot about our history, but there's more of a fascination with the distant past, which is often not very well articulated, but we do a very poor job of articulating our more recent past, the last couple hundred years, in our respective locales. That's where the real meat is. Of course, the founding fathers are important. I've never said that they weren't, but our respective locales are just as important. They are part of the fabric of this nation. And Freemasonry obviously came to the colonies. It was the colonial period, very early in this ideal of what would become the United States. And obviously, further west you go, it gets a little bit closer to the modern era. California is officially admitted into the Union in 1850. It had been annexed by the United States a little bit before that, but the gold rush really precipitated the rush to the other rush, which was to get it into the Union. So that's sort of how I kind of look at Freemasonry in a lot of ways. It's an endlessly fascinating maze. There is such a vast collection of material culture and literature. Not all of it is great, but some of it is written in the time it was written. So that almost by default makes it fascinating. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. Some can be very dry and crunchy. Some can be very florid and not true at all, but just really interesting where they're coming from. And these reflect not necessarily the truth of what the Freemasonry is, but what they wish it to be and what they're seeking answers. And it also points to certain trends in their society at that time, different outlooks on religion, spirituality, and so forth.
Well, and it makes sense too that the idea, even if there is no tangible evidence to show that we descended from, say, the Knights Templar, right? If we take on the trappings and the ideas, the best ideas of what they represented, right? Is that not a legitimate form of improving ourselves?
I would say so. Yeah. It's a legitimate avenue to take. In fact, most of our Masonic degrees, they are not true at all, but they are used for inspiration to take on these ideals, right? They're the psychodrama, the legends, the ritual history are meant to inspire us to be what the fraternity claims its goal is, which is to improve our minds, improve our character, and so forth.
All right. Well, so Adam, you had mentioned that you are now involved for the past couple of decades, that you have been actually working in the fraternity itself as part of your career. Would you like to elaborate on what you have done, some of the roles you have taken on, and what you're currently doing?
Sure. So I started working in the fraternity in the membership services department at the Grand Lodge of California. And then after a few years, I was tapped to run the library and museum. And so I did that for 10 years. And so my total runtime at the Grand Lodge of California was about 14 and a half years. So in the 10 years I ran the library and museum, that was a wonderful experience. And really just, I can't even find the words to describe how that improved who I am as a person and got me on track again to reignite my interest in pursuing a graduate degree, getting that finished up. And because I was already working as a non-degreed historian and dealing with a subject matter that I was endlessly fascinated with, and the collection at the Grand Lodge of California is vast, it's important, and there are so many projects available in that collection. I do miss that collection, and they've done a really good job in preserving their history, and I was very proud to be a part of that. And they continue to do that. Excellent work there. And so I really, really did enjoy. That was one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. And not to demean what I'm doing now, but that really started me on a really good path, because in that position I had access to these records, and I was able finally to start doing research and writing papers. And I found a subject that was really kind of a wild subject and got people excited. And so that's how I kind of got on the lecture circuit. And then I decided, I went to the International Conference on the History of Freemasonry back in 2007. And this was great because it was in Edinburgh, and it's one of my favorite cities. And I got to meet all of these Masonic scholars that I really admired. And but I was watching these presentations, and I knew I had it in me that I could do this. And so that was kind of my moment where I said, I can do this too. I am capable of doing this. And so, but I was lamenting to a friend that I don't have anything that I can really center on. I felt like a generalist. But I quickly found something, and then I submitted the paper for the next ICHF, which was 2 years later, and it was accepted, and I was able to start my career I got myself noticed on that front. And it was well received, and I continued on with it. I actually turned that whole subject into a trilogy. And then I started on other subjects, and then lecturing about, because I was involved in the interpretation of fraternal history, I started doing a lot of lectures on that and showing our material culture and what it meant. And so I not only lectures, but I was able to do videos as complements to our exhibits at the Grand Lodge. So it really helped shape me and who I am today. Moving forward, this is over several decades. I was initiated in 1994. And at that time, I was one of the younger members of the lodge, but there were some other guys. They were in their 30s, and they were interested in Masonic history. And one of the guys that got me into the lodge, he was assistant Grand Secretary, and he introduced me to the Grand Secretary. And all of them had been kind of tied into the Masonic historical community. So they introduced me to Quatuor Coronati and their publication Ars Quatuor Coronator, the Philalethes Society. And in fact, the brother who got me into the lodge, who I just mentioned, he was a president. In fact, both of them were, Joel Springer and John Cooper. They were both presidents of the society.
Okay.
And here I am now, president of the Philalethes. So they introduced me to all of this and said, if this is what you're interested in, there is so much you can do with it. And they always encouraged me, when are you going to start doing something with what you're finding? We want to encourage you to write this down.
Just poking you with the stick, but in a good way, right?
Oh, no, it was always in a good way. They weren't poking me. They were encouraging me most gently, because I'd like to think that they saw something in me, that I could articulate what I was studying. I know I sound a little bit inarticulate right now. It's been a really long day, and I'm sort of out of words. And I've been editing and indexing for months. And so I've nearly lost the capability of speech because I'm doing such intricate work in my head, in my office, at home. And then at work, I have a lot of solitary work that I do. I'm the executive director of the Oakland Scottish Rite Historical Foundation. So it's a foundation that we formed a few years ago to help restore and preserve not only the building, which in and of itself is a work of art and therefore sort of an artifact in Oakland history, but also the history contained within its walls, the books, the archive, the personal papers within that archive of our members, and some very interesting, well-developed human beings, some of them very cranky, some of them very eccentric. And it shows the wildness of the West and the formation of California. But also, I think every community has these people. And so it really shows a new society in flux, right? Especially as these fraternal organizations get off the ground. So that's my day job. And then my everyday job, and especially on the weekends, is I mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the Philalethes Society. I'm also the editor for Heredom, which is the annual journal of the Scottish Rite Research Society. And I'm also a member of Quatuor Coronati Lodge, and I do a lot of work proofreading and doing some other stuff for Ars Quatuor Coronatorum. So I'm quite involved in research, a lot of other people's research, but I'm pecking away at my next few offerings.
So that's, if you don't mind me, this was something we were talking about earlier. As a person, especially someone who is very much involved with the editorial side in the selection of pieces for our, like Heredom in Ars Quatuor Coronatorum, what would your advice be for those brethren who are looking to become the writers of tomorrow or the Masonic researchers of tomorrow? Since you now have you've been behind the scenes, right? And
Right.
having published so much yourself, now you get you're part of the sausage making process for the selection of these pieces.
Yeah, the advice I would have is, well, there's a few bits of advice. One is finding a viable subject to write on. You have to decide, well, one, what is it that I want to write about? What are the resources? And then seek those out. The other is this where would this end up? Is this a better presentation? Or is this something that can be published in a journal? And if so, which kind of journal? Would this be better locally? Would this be better nationwide, or would this be better internationally? But on top of all of that, beginning research is to know how to research. And you learn this in basics of it in high school. So it's not just 100,000% graduate level knowledge, but it is built upon very heavily in the graduate level and postgraduate levels. But the ability to research, to know what your resources are, the value of the resources, how they weight, are they reliable? Do I only have secondary sources as opposed to primary sources? Seeking those out, it can take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and sometimes money to locate these sources, because with research, you shouldn't always only have tertiary research, tertiary evidence, only secondary resources. And the ability to analyze them and to kind of pick out the truths as they are. Also having a question: what is it I need to know? What is it that everybody needs to know? What am I trying to find in this research? And it's way more complicated than that, but those are the basics, I feel.
Okay. So with your involvement with the Scottish, let's go ahead and talk about some of the organizations. And let's begin with the Scottish Rite Research Society. How did you become involved with the Scottish Rite Research Society? How did, I guess, you move through to become one of the principal leaders within that organization? How did that come about?
Well, I'm going to jump back real quick because
Sure.
I did forget something. One thing that is very important out of all of that regarding research is that once you have your question and what you need to answer and your evidence, being able to format it correctly into a cogent article with a beginning, middle, and end, your footnotes, everything. There's style guides will help you with that, but how to construct a cogent argument that is your research paper. So that's it in a nutshell. But moving on to the Scottish Rite Research Society, I think it's to echo back to even my what I was saying regarding my evolution through getting involved in research.
Mhm.
Is that's how I got involved. Those simple hints from my Masonic mentors to start investigating what other people were writing. And that's another cue, is see what other people have written on these subjects, right? And to read what people write, even if it's not the subject you're researching yourself, see how these papers are written for these particular journals, and that you'll gain a knowledge of how to construct a paper. And so because of the work I had been doing, to circle back, that's how I ended up being on the board for the Scottish Rite Research Society. I got an email one day, as often it happens. I had been working at the Grand Lodge, and I got an email asking if I'd like to take over for editing the Plumb Line, which was the quarterly newsletter. And I said, these are the things that pop up and you don't turn down, right?
Right.
And so I did.
Oh, 100%.
I said,
oh, you did.
no, I did not turn it down. I did answer it. And I said,
Yeah,
of course I would like to do it. And that started, I had edited my own works, which you probably should always get someone else to do. And I worked with other people, but then becoming an editor of someone else's work, that was very, very daunting at first, but I really like the interaction between me and the authors, and being able to try to understand what they're saying and draw out what is best in their paper. So papers that we receive aren't necessarily what they look like when they're produced. Behind every great writer is a good editor too, I believe. Just like for every good man is a good wife or partner or whatever. That's an antiquated phrase, I'm sure, but there is always somebody's shoulders that we're standing on, and we help each other, right? And editors are supposed to be that. I know in movies and other media, editors are always seen as cantankerous and hard-nosed. But I like the personal. I'm not that way. I like and most people I know that edit are not that way either. Trying to find what is best and what the author is trying to say, trying to condense it in some cases, and dress it, right? Strip it and then put it back together again. And I find that work to be very rewarding. Of course, I learn quite a bit because I get some papers that are ordinarily interesting and filled with facts that I've never considered. And it gives me tools for myself to become a better writer. Because not only am I editing it and looking at the style guide and what do I do with this and this and this, but also reading how other people write. And I've been able to edit some very excellent writers. So I took the job. Well, it was volunteer. I took the position for the Scottish Rite Research Society editor of the Plumb Line, and did that for, I want to say, like 6 years or something. And it was great because during COVID, I was fortunate I had a temp job and they kept me at home. They allowed me to do the job from home. So I was able to, after work, clock off, and I would work on my editing. I got off of social media, and I finally had something that this is mine. And if I'm going to be locked indoors, I'm going to do something to totally improve myself. And that was such a great inner journey for me. So it was a way we all did different things during the pandemic to keep ourselves sane. That was mine. It seemed natural. I can be quite sociable and I love to talk, but at heart, I like to be alone and I like to just be in my own head. So it was a great way for me to do that constructively. So, and then fast forward, I moved back up to the Bay Area. And at one point I was asked, do you want to edit Heredom? Because Brent Morris was retiring. And I said, of course I do. And well,
there you go, falling for it again.
yeah, I didn't learn the ancient master's word. But no, it's nothing you would ever say no to. Because if you want to progress in your chosen field, these are the opportunities you should take, right? No matter how difficult or daunting they may seem at first, you will come out the other end a different person at the very least. And I always remember that when I was going in as master, a friend of mine had already served as master for a year, and he did a 2-year term. And he said, after this is over, you are going to be a different man. And that was said in all positivity, right? I was a different person. I considered the challenge to be transformative. I need this sort of thing in my life to be a better, different man, a transformed man. And I feel that these opportunities have been that way for me. So that's why I find myself so busy all the time. And sometimes I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, what did I do? but it's so rewarding at the end, right? That when I can come up for air, the end result is spectacular. It is difficult because you do have to kind of beat the brush for people who are ready to produce papers. That can be very difficult because I think, as we talked about earlier, Billy, is that technology, with its ever-changing technology, has changed the ways that we react or how we interpret media, and also changing educational styles, for better or for worse, have altered the way people read, how they write, and the traditional style of writing has it hasn't changed, but the production of papers has slowed down. And I struggle with this because I don't think it's because of all the reasons I just listed. It's just that maybe there's just not enough of us anymore that are producing these.
Well, and
I don't know.
it may be cultural too, right? That as things have become, as the speed of life has increased, right? The way we consume information has changed. Everything's packetized, right? And
Yeah.
it's curated experiences. It's no longer the journey of discovery. It's now, here is this curated set of information that has been selected to convince you of whatever.
Yeah.
And so now everything it's almost like information has become a commodity. Not to get political or anything like that. It's just that everything has become based around the format of small sound bites.
And everything else is TLDR.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's
that's the whole
too
reason
long
we
to
have
read.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had those comments before. Wow, that's a really long paper. Well, it's long because it says what it says. Yeah, you're right. That's part of it. There are dangers in that because the discipline of writing a 50-page paper it's quite complex, and it takes a long time, a lot of thought, a lot of revision. And sometimes people don't have time for that. And there is that need to have it now, get it out now. The dangers are vast, though, because it increases the chances of soapboxing with these sound bites, easily digested information that doesn't really convey anything. It flattens history, especially when people
Right.
want a 5-minute elevator pitch. But again, it also encourages at times, like I said before, soapboxing, where a pet project is elevated and all of the bad habits of some historians come to the fore, where you can't tell what is being referenced, right, or where it comes from, and if there's been any counter to it, right? Yeah, there's information that exists all over the place. Plus, that is a danger. But because we live in this technological age, it is now more than ever easier to find information that was previously stuffed away in an archive.
Right.
The problem, though, with Freemasonry, well, it's not the problem, but with any subject, is that this is why most courses, especially postgraduate, will require you to understand or read or write different languages other than your native one. It's because of the source material might be in French, German, Greek, or whatever. In Freemasonry, it tends to be French or German. And that's helpful to have a background of that because there's so much that is still undiscovered in some of these countries that speak these languages. There's the Anglophonic perspective on Freemasonry, and there's a whole world out there. So availing yourself of these different sources is extraordinarily important, and understanding that there's a vast quantity of material that may not be yet available to you, and seeking those out and utilizing the internet for those. That is really important. But I think back to the original topic, it is difficult to sit down and just say, I'm going to research a paper. It is transformative, but it is also frustrating. And I can say, without trying to scare anybody away, you will sit for hours, days, months, maybe even years. It's not something that's pursued for fame. It's to answer a question, right? It's to add to that historical knowledge. There's no fame involved. I know that Masonic presentations have become all the rage, and that wasn't always so, but I'm happy to see it, right? I can never knock that, but care must be taken because a good presentation is a good presentation, but it also still requires the responsibility to convey accurate knowledge, which only can be gleaned from research. and primary research, not just reading a book, right? It's not a book report.
Right.
So I hope that the presenters and most of the people I know that are on that presentation circuit try to do that. So it's to just give a talk is one thing, but to also, even if it's just a talk for your lodge, to have the most accurate and most insightful information, that makes it so much better, because what it does primarily, it changes the minds of those guys that say, I only want you to talk for 5 minutes. We don't like this stuff. But if you have something that is meaningful and well articulated and well researched and it can touch their hearts, I think that is really worth it. And that's something that I learned the hard way, because I was fascinated with some very, very overly complex ideas, very heavily philosophical ideas that weren't reaching my audience at all. But when I started couching these ideas in layman's terms, which is what makes philosophical ideas, the primary goals of Freemasonry is to make good men better. I know that's cliche at this point, but it really is to touch people's hearts, to connect with each other. And because we have this artificial society that connects us together, we're not bound by religion or politics or even philosophy, etc. We're bound by our Masonic oaths. If you could put these heavy philosophical ideas and condense them into brotherly love, relief, and truth, and speak to that and use history as that vehicle, you will touch hearts of guys that normally don't want to hear that sort of thing, right? You don't need to overcomplicate it with going through the Sephiroth of the tree of life. It can be very practical, and history can be very complex, but it's also very practical if you can convey your idea. So that's in a nutshell on what I would say to future researchers. But this is the philosophy I try to use when I'm reading papers. Is this something is going to interest the body, the Freemasonry writ large? I don't ever think that it's just our readers. I want it to contribute to the vast knowledge that is already out there. And it is a very legitimate discipline, Masonic history, because it's tied in with local, national, and international histories. It's tied in with it. It's not even parallel to it. It's tied in with it. So it is a valid course of study. It may get funny looks, but those in the know will understand that it is at its core the different influences that have grown Freemasonry, and in turn Freemasonry grown communities, right? So your thoughts?
Yeah, now in here in Texas, we have a bit of an advantage because most of the leading historical figures within our state were all Masons, right? And part of it is what they did through Masonry. The education system that we have here in Texas was really built by Masonic lodges. It was Texas A&M was built on land that was set aside by a Masonic president of the Republic.
Right.
So, and the great inspiring thing about that, I think, looking at history as opposed to maybe the Romantic history, it's great to hear about the Greeks were descended from the Delphic oracles and the Orphic poems and that. But when it comes down to it, I think the fact that we have these inspirational stories of real men who did real actions that had very real results of building these communities, like you said, and not just in the United States, but even abroad. Simon Bolivar was, a lot of people don't realize, considered the George Washington of Latin America, and he was a Freemason.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding the niche in history to which you want to study, is it social or cultural history, religious history, but understanding that these are actual disciplines that actually have their rules, and people have written great works in these fields, and to avail yourself of these resources before jumping off and talking about the Greeks descended from Atlantis, etc. More to the point, what does it do for the average person, right? Having a practical point in history works for people, because not only does it tells us where we were and how we became. That sounds like a cliche answer. So we're not condemned to repeat our past, et cetera. That's very surface level. One, I believe that you should study history just for the sheer love of it. It's like loving art just because it's beautiful. But it also teaches us how things work in the world, who these characters were, how they reflect on us today. We understand the connections between ourselves internationally, even though we might be stuck in some weird little town in nowhere, USA. We have a connection with the rest of the world, right? And that's what history does too. Also, it makes for just a fascinating story, and you can escape into the past. I'd be guilty of that myself. I had this wonderful dream once where a friend of mine and we were in the dream, and we had discovered the secret of time travel. And this comes from looking at old photographs too much. And where we were in the dream was exactly where I had been a couple days before. But we had not, we were so surprised that it was that easy to time travel, but that by going into a sort of trance state and pushing ourselves into the photo, we could enter that time period. And we did it. And I'm looking at this out this window, and I can see this ruined building, but I can't see a street sign. Of course, they didn't have street signs like that. It looked like a modern one, but it had been melted. And I realized I'd been looking at it had been during the earthquake. Of course, I had this where I had been a few days before. It was all tied in with the 1906 earthquake. So I'm not thinking that I actually time traveling or I conjured this myself. It was coming from external sources. But boy, was it exciting. And when I woke up suddenly, I couldn't get back in the dream. It was very disappointing. But I loved that dream because it really showed me how much you can escape into history and how much you can envelop yourself in the past, not as an idealized past. It's easy to get romantic about this past, and especially where I live, it's the Wild West. And I'm sure you as Texans know about this too. But it's this really interesting struggle and this clash of the cultures that are mashing together. It's so fascinating and wonderful, and how you can escape into that, especially when the modern world gets a little bit too heavy. So, and also come out insightful about today's current events as well.
So that is, it sounds almost like a transformative dream, especially because the fact most of the time you can't remember what you dreamed about last night, but here it is, it sticks with you all this time later.
Yeah, I mean, I have very vivid dreams, but this one always sticks out. I always have these clever dreams where, wow, that was so clever. I'll never forget that. And then I do. This one just haunts me, and it's just such a it's just a wonderful memory, part of my own history. I really like thinking about our own histories, and that's why I'm very pleased where it's been a few years, and I think it's still kind of a hot topic, but people got really into getting onto ancestry.com and doing their own genealogy and 23andMe. It's really fun, and it's enlightening to see where you come from. And as someone who has kind of grown up with this, I'm constantly in it. My mother is deeply into our family history, and not just genealogically, but socially, and trying to glean what was never told to her by her own father, what's been lost to time, and dreaming about what could have been, or what the possibilities were for those people who are long dead, and reconstructing a past, because especially in family histories, a lot of things are missing. And indeed in social histories and in cultural histories, there's what we call silences occur, where either by force, where an entire history of a people have been forcibly erased, or they've been destroyed, or they've been forgotten because they've been deemed irrelevant. Freemasonry has that danger because we have in the past thrown our records out. We create our own silences, and this notion that nobody knows where we came from or what we do or whatever, this old canard, it's so false, and it actually says to the world that we're kind of bumbling about it, that we don't even know what our organization is, and that's just not true. There are some missing pieces, but we are starting to we know where we came from, and we know what this organization does. It's finding these lost histories, which is so important, and how we interacted with other parts of society, for better or for worse, for good or for ill. I mean, we're not always on the side of the angels. Freemasonry is composed of individuals who have their own agendas in life too, and have done some wacky things, or what we would consider wacky. But I want to caution, though, I say this because I'm being very easy and kind of joking around. When I do my studies and I'm doing my research as a historian, you have to endeavor to keep your own personal biases away from what you're writing
Very
and
much
take
so,
it
yeah.
as it is. And you might be shocked at what you read. You're a human being. You might be shocked. You might be disgusted sometimes. Very rarely in Masonic history am I disgusted, by the way. But when you're reading about very violent times, times of great upheavals, there's some shocking things that you will encounter. But keeping your own, just reporting as it is, and finding out the reasons why, getting into the psychology of other human beings through what's written, what's available to you, and what you can suss out from that, right?
Well, so Gabe, do you have any comments before we move on?
Yeah, the I was thinking about the transformative process, right? And so I'm kind of mentally rewinding a little bit, and that dream seems really cool and everything. What is the organizational activity, I guess, or the maybe it's a role you've taken on or an organization you've joined that you feel has had the most impact in your transformation as a man?
What role I've had that's transformed me the most?
Yeah, like it could be maybe like maybe it's an organization you've joined, maybe it's a role you've taken on, like either through virtue of membership or through service, something that's changed you more fundamentally. Kind of like that rewinding a little bit back to when you were about to assume the East and you were told, "Hey, you're going to come out very differently on this end." I know I'm rewinding back a bit, but I've been kind of interpreting this entire conversation since that statement through that lens, and now I'm just kind of wondering.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's many opportunities in Freemasonry for us to do this that's not available to the common person, and that's what makes the organization, the craft, so special, because it can take what a person who may perceive themselves as an average human being, a workaday world person, and transform them into a leader. And leader is kind of a generic term, but choose your vehicle for that sort of leadership. Me personally, I don't go into any kind of role thinking, what kind of leader am I going to be? I think that leadership should come naturally. So I don't navel gaze too much on that. And that's why it's hard for me to answer this. But I will say, I was just about, when you asked that question, it was the primary thing, the most special thing, I mean, other than being initiated into the organization, boy, I'll never forget that. Gosh. And that was so transformative and made me feel so welcome, especially in a lodge that is tied to San Francisco history. And now that we've consolidated and we were part of this kind of old San Francisco, the idea that being able to carry that tradition to other brothers and convey to them that no matter where you come from, San Francisco especially has always welcomed others from other parts of the world. They're almost becoming citizens of San Francisco at that point by aligning themselves with this lodge, right? And that it's such an important tradition to carry on. And so that's what transforms me. And moving forward with that same feeling I have working with the Philalethes and Scottish Rite Research Society and even Quatuor Coronati, where I can help brothers, I can help transform their hopes and dreams in their written form into a reality, to contribute, to be a part of that contribution to the greater knowledge of Freemasonry. That to me is service as well, right? It's a lot of work, but it's that like I said before, that end result is that there now that is a part of Masonic libraries anywhere you go, right? That contribution you made, whether it be my own work or what I have helped bring into this world, someone else's work that I've worked on. That to me is transformative. So it's not necessarily the organizations I've joined. We've all joined the similar ones, but being able to
Sure.
have opportunities within that. And then for myself to transcend all of these different organizations and contribute to Freemasonry writ large,
Right.
right?
So there's definitely a sense of like access to legacy and passing down of legacy is in and of itself kind of a transformative act for you that allows you to grow. That's interesting because I really like that because that also plays with that that innate desire you pointed out that people feel drawn to do, and the ancestry searches and the 23andMe searches, right? So I think it, that makes sense. People are looking for legacy. They're looking for that chain of union, both through, I think, like horizontally through space, through the fraternity, and through time, right? Via history of the lodge, or history that you might have access to as a historian. That's
And
really
this
neat. I like that.
this can be done in any organization. It's not just limited to Freemasonry. It could be the Odd Fellows. It could be any organization that has a history within the community. But through these organizations, we become closer to that community and to the history of that community. We become part of its words on the pages of its history. I think and for those of us, especially in the modern world where we're hit right and left with all sorts of noise, the experience within fraternal organizations gives us a sort of not solitude, but a quietude, being around familiar faces, having tasks to do where you're dependent upon, the fact that how we communicate our degrees and the method of instruction is sometimes mouth to ear, that it dispenses with all of the other stuff. And I know that there's a lot of move to let's make all this digital and everything. And yes, the digital world can make things a little bit more streamlined. But I think that sometimes we misunderstand that just because it's old and, young guys don't want to have to learn mouth to ear ritual and blah, blah, blah. Why not? Why can't we put down our phones for a couple hours? Why can't we sit one-on-one? Because I tell you, I've met people, younger people, and I'll play the old man right now because I get to be now. I meet younger men sometimes that interact socially in ways I never understood. I don't understand. It's because the method of socialization is so different. And it's people that have grown up in front of their screens and not really one-on-one. I was always taught to look people in the eye, et cetera. And I meet people, and it's not just Masons I'm picking on, just the public in general, where there's an inability to kind of focus on a one-on-one interaction. And Freemasonry and other fraternal organizations can help one center oneself and take us away from that noise, teach us methods of acting as a gentleman that we may not have encountered in our daily life, especially for those of us who don't have to wear a suit every day or wear jeans and a t-shirt and boots and get dirty all day, to be able to scrub ourselves off and to dress like a gentleman. That's something that's very special, especially because it fulfills at least my American dream that I'm not in a classist society. I can become a gentleman at the end of the day. I'm not defined by the dirt on my hands or the calluses on my fingers. I think it's so necessary, and that's transformative. It enables the average person to be a high priest, to be a worshipful master, to take their obligation in a historical lodge and be bound to a tradition that's not only part of a fraternal tradition, but also a civic tradition. And that's the history I'm after, what the mechanics of that, the inner workings of that, the human stories of that. Yeah.
And it's interesting too that you talk about the push to go more digital. And I find in my own personal interactions with younger Masons that a lot of times younger Masons are actually wanting the more complex. They're wanting that mouth to ear experience because they've grown up with the online transactional friendships, right?
Mhm.
And that's what Masonry gives them is something different, right? For the first time in their lives, they now have this ability to be in a purely social environment with other people. And I think that that is actually one of the strengths that we have if people think about it, because you always hear, older Masons, especially the younger guys, want it cheaper and faster. And I find that the opposite is actually true. They've had it cheaper and faster their entire lives. So this is the one opportunity they have to actually get back and have a truly social experience in the classical sense of the word.
Absolutely. And I think I'm really grateful that as Freemasonry has adapted to technology, it's been a little bit slow, I suppose, but I'm glad that the Grand Lodges I mean, at least I can only speak for mine, have embraced it, but we still value that one-on-one connection and celebrate it. It's how we understand each other. But technology obviously is a tool. It's not a panacea. It can't fix anything. But boy, has it really helped in bringing a lot of not only our promotional side into the fore, but also helped us instruct our brothers, especially during the pandemic, or when they're at home and can't be available, they can't avail themselves to their coaches, right? But I think that still needs to be done. I do occasionally on online forums. I see guys, we need to dispense with this, and we need to get rid of this and that, and it's like, but really, why? Not because I'm a hard traditionalist in that regard, but because it works. That's why the beauty of sitting down with somebody is not too dissimilar from sitting down with an actual book. There's a psychological and physiological response to these actions.
Right.
And they're necessary and they're part of our human evolution. I don't get as much information reading stuff online. And indeed, I'm in front of a computer a lot, so don't think I'm not. But it's easier for me to print something out and read it. I get more out of it, right? I have to hold it in my hands, which is why I make my laptop look like a book. I have a book case that looks like a book. My Kindle has a cover on it that resembles a book and has the weight of a book.
Right.
So transforming technology to suit what you hold dear too. I'm not just a bibliophile that won't give up his books, but I think the embracing of technology can help, but it also can hinder us, especially when we're in it all the time. And the human interactions, and sometimes they can be quite complicated, and sometimes we've all been in lodge. I'm speaking to a Masonic audience. Not everybody gets along all the time. We're humans. But the ability to face that, to accept it, and to work it out in a brotherly, civil fashion is so important for this world. And I'm not saying this to suggest that everybody should be a Mason, but these are basic lessons of Freemasonry. But this is to the civility, but the civility goes along with the acquisition of wisdom, that lifelong journey of learning, and to become more mild and circumspect. This comes with age too, and that brings me to another thing: is that in the hot topic is Masonic research and Masonic history. But it's not political and it's not a race. It's what you learn in Freemasonry doesn't come on your third degree. We all know that.
Right.
But it's not something where, where are the esoteric things that you promised? It's more subtle than that. It flowers. It blooms. It grows and blooms. And it takes time. And with that time comes age. You will get old in the fraternity. So don't think you haven't found it and drop out, because it manifests in subtle ways. And if you're perceptive, which comes with the acquisition of wisdom, then you will recognize it when it happens to you. That I think is one of the great mysteries of our organization. And I'm not going to say it's limited to us, but the great mysteries of being a human being, but especially when we talk about this within Freemasonry, the lessons of our degrees, it's meant to plant a seed and bloom. It's not going to be given to you just because you joined it. And the degrees that you attain, whether by attainment or you attended in a weekend or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's different traditions and there's different methods of instruction. I'm not criticizing any of that. It's what you do with it, really. And it takes time. It just takes time. And I'm impatient. We all are. I want to get things done. I'm right now sitting on 2 projects that I'm just dying to work on, but I have to sleep. I'm married. I have things I got to do around the house, and it will come when it comes. Right. And boy, when it comes, then that's great. You can fill your night with just this ultimate pleasure of writing, and all of the research that you've done will just start to take shape.
The joy of investigation.
Yes, and that's one of the things I actually, it's often been asked, what would be your main requirement for a candidate into Freemasonry? And there are some answers I've heard that are quite quite harsh. They have to do this and they have to be educated in this and that. And we are educated in different ways. And even we all have to admit that. And I guess if I had any requirement other than the normal ones, is that it's not a requirement. It's something that I want to see in a candidate, is that they're inquisitive,
Right.
naturally curious about life. And what, I haven't really been disappointed. The brothers that I don't do a lot of investigations, but the brothers I've met that have been investigated and led into the lodges and are now brothers, I see a curiosity with them, and I can hear their interest. And some are just beginning and some are quite advanced, I suppose. And they all have a perspective that was worthy of consideration. And I think that Freemasonry, or involvement in Freemasonry, can teach us that, is to listen and to try to understand a different perspective, even though we may not agree or if it's wrong. But also, because of our insistence on learning about rhetoric, we can work through that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we were already over an hour into the conversation. I did want to ask about your work with Quatuor Coronati, right? Because
Okay.
you're currently junior warden, and that is quite an accomplishment, right? Not very many Americans are accepted as full members of the lodge, much less an officer. Would you mind explaining to some of our listeners that may not be aware of what Quatuor Coronati is, the importance of the lodge, and then secondly, what your thoughts are, how you became involved with it as a member? Yeah, so I guess what I'm really asking is, would you mind telling us a little bit about Quatuor Coronati?
Yeah, I was actually going to kind of illustrate kind of a little bit of a background of all these organizations that I represent. But with Quatuor Coronati, it is known as the premier lodge of research, meaning it was the first. And it was chartered in 1886. The warrant actually was issued, and this is all on their website, I'm not making it up, it was issued in late 1884, but there was a delay, and because some people were traveling, et cetera. And so it was finally formalized in 1886.
Wasn't the original master, he was in the military, I believe, and he
Yeah,
was,
Charles Warren.
yeah.
Yeah, he was, as their website states, he was on a diplomatic, this is a quote, diplomatic and military mission to what is now Botswana. So he was definitely an active individual. But the idea was to form a lodge devoted to the inquest into the history of Freemasonry, using an authentic historical method, the rigor of research, because at that time, there were a lot of things being written about Freemasonry that weren't exactly accurate. A lot of them were very fanciful, romantic, and this was in a way to provide a different side of that, to combat some of the more fanciful notions of Freemasonry, to legitimize the actual history and its social and cultural impact, right? So it's not just a bunch of guys want to do some research and so they form a lodge. There is a real necessity for this, and not just to combat all the fanciful things. It is, as I stated earlier on and continuously, it's to demonstrate the cultural and social impact of the fraternity.
Right.
So that's its primary goal. It's based in London. And so it's been around for a very long time. Their flagship publication is Ars Quatuor Coronatorum, and it is also known as AQC. My Latin isn't necessarily great, so it's okay to say AQC. It is an English organization. It's chartered under the United Grand Lodge of England. But we have had some American members. Dwight Smith was one of them. Alex Horn, who was not only a California Mason, but also lived in San Francisco. So that's a really nice little, I guess, feather in my cap, being the second San Francisco Mason to be admitted into the lodge. Brent Morris was its first American master, or US-based master.
Right.
But it is primarily an English organization. So not many Americans may even know about it, or they may think it's too British, but it is international in scope. Wherever the empire went, so did Freemasonry, and by extension, the United States as well, and North America, right? So there's a lot for us to cover. So that's Quatuor Coronati in a nutshell. It is, we have our correspondence circle. So you can subscribe to the correspondence circle. That's QCCC, the Quatuor Coronati Correspondence Circle, and you get the annual transactions, which is AQC, and which is the journal of all of the research papers published for that year. So membership in the lodge, though, is a little bit more exclusive, and it's the population of the lodge is drawn from those who have demonstrated some sort of research project, and it has to be accepted by the lodge, but has a known history of research. For me personally, I never set out. I was a member of the correspondence circle, but I never thought I would ever become a member. And so when that chance came and I was accepted, I was overjoyed because, I mean, it was a real honor. I'm still trying to figure it out. There are some real giants in that lodge and brothers there that I really respect their work. And so it's being able to, what I like about it the most, though, is that it helps me, the path that I'm on, me personally, without anybody else saying anything about it, is how I can transform myself, how I can improve myself. If this is the path that I'm on, this opportunity gives me a chance to do it better by learning from those who have come before me in this chosen field. And Quatuor Coronati, the Scottish Rite Research Society, and the Philalethes Society all contribute to that. I'm sure as Texans about the Philalethes Society, begun in 1926. It's the oldest independent research society. So whereas Quatuor Coronati is the oldest research lodge in the world, Philalethes is the oldest independent research society. So it's not a lodge, right? And that was begun in 1926. And their publication, or our publication, is quarterly. It's the Journal of the Philalethes Society. And Philalethes means lover of truth. So it's yet another outlet for Masonic research. And then lastly and these are in no particular order, so I'm not providing any kind of hierarchy here, is the Scottish Rite Research Society, which is actually the baby of them all, begun in 1991. And that is, their annual is Heredom. And it is to investigate not only the history of the high degrees, we do take a broader scope, fraternalism in general, but we do like it when there's papers on the Scottish Rite or high degree Masonry in general. So all three of these combine, at least in my mind. We spoke about this a few days ago, Billy, that when you're in a particular profession, there are trade organizations and trade publications that are offered that if you're deep into your profession, you'll subscribe to, because it's just kind of accepted. And they offer opportunities for you to go out and attend conferences, et cetera. And so this, to me, I'm sorry?
Yeah, and expand your knowledge and
exactly
find best practices.
Exactly. And so these organizations, for me, kind of fit that bill. These are things that I think that all Masons should belong to. And then, of course, there are the other research organizations that are also are very worthy. Grand College of Rites, God, that's cool. TLR, shout out, Texas Lodge of Research, that is important. And all of the other lodges, the Southern California Research Lodge, the Northern California Research Lodge, all of these are so important. I don't have a hierarchy for all of these. They are important for the communities they serve. The three I mentioned are very international and have a history, a legend, a reputation that cannot be gainsaid. And so I think that for a budding Masonic researcher to subscribe to these, and this is not a sell, this is a sort of a suggestion that to read these publications, to see how people write their research. There's a variety of writing styles, right? But by being in these publications, it's accepted because it's been deemed by peer review and whatnot that these are acceptable for the publication and to be put out to the general population. It also provides non-Masons an opportunity to read what other Masonic historians are writing. And it gives, I think, a good perspective, and also kudos to our organization for really emphasizing the knowledge part of our organization. We talk about the gaining or the acquisition of knowledge. And I think that the research organizations in all of their forms provide those opportunities. So these happen to be the ones that I'm representing at this moment, three of them. And for Philalethes, I'll be president for 2 years. I was just elected in February. In November, I will be going to Quatuor Coronati and installing my successor as junior warden. And there's the future from there. For Heredom, I continue to be the editor. All of my weekends are putting on my editor hat. And right now we are closing up shop on volume 31. I am putting the finishing. I have another 12 hours or so on the index. Never thought I'd ever do an index. That is a legitimate profession. I am not a professional indexer, but I respect that profession, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I've had incredible mentorship from Brent and then other brothers who are on the board who have given me a lot of help. Chris Ruley is another one, and he's our associate editor. These are and all of the brothers, and the list is really long, so I can't name them all, but they are all very helpful and lend their particular expertise when I call them up in the afternoon or in the evening and kind of panicked. I'm like, what do I do about this?
So I do have to say that is one good thing about the Masonic researcher community, if you will, is that all of them are extremely generous with their time and their advice. So you're
Yes.
not in it alone, right? You can always reach out. And the guy whose book you read, you could reach out to him, and don't be surprised if they answer back and have all sorts of advice to
Yeah,
help you improve yourself.
because knowledge should not ever be hoarded, right? If you're working on a particular subject, I mean, don't give it away. But the general knowledge that you possess, and someone asks you how you do it, it's your duty to impart it. And I was always very surprised about that. I love that, because when I got the job for the museum at Grand Lodge, I had a lot of questions. And so I reached out to people I'd met briefly in the past, and they're now good friends because I reached out and said, hey, listen, I have questions. And they were so open. And even outside the Masonic community, calling up museums and archives and saying, I'm just got this gig and I have questions about this. What would you do in this situation? And they are free with their information. I've never met anybody that's been haughty about it, because they're excited that somebody's interested in their corner of the earth. And like you said, it is a community, and so it's there for all of us, because we possess different types of knowledge, and if it can help someone's current research or future research, all the better, because we don't possess all the information, right? We're not born with it. We don't pop out of the egg knowing it all. It's something that's acquired over time, so it may take several years to come to fruition.
Right.
So yeah.
So Adam, if you don't mind, this has been a fantastic conversation. I know we can keep on going, but
Yeah.
I want to be cognizant of your time. And also here, I have to say, you were one of the speakers for Texas MasoniCon. So I want to make sure that we give our listeners and attendees a reason to come up, right? We don't want to explore everything right now. Let's leave some for MasoniCon.
Right. Yeah, and I can talk about these things in a similar manner when I'm there. I do have a presentation about thinking historically and using visual aids from my collection here at the Oakland Scottish Rite to sort of illustrate how I've determined what a history of an item is. And these are practical questions that people have for what I do, and so I can impart that on the listeners, and also delve into some other deeper stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm looking forward to welcoming you to Texas.
Yeah, me too. That's going to be great. I'm going to have a good time. Hopefully it won't be too hot or humid.
Well,
It'll be hot.
It'll be hot. Yeah, it'll be really
I don't know
hot.
about humid. Fort Worth is blessedly not humid compared to other places in Texas. So
Okay.
I know there's
that's
a couple people that'll say, "Oh yeah, it's really humid," and I'm like, "No, it's not."
Well, yeah, that's true. But I do
Yeah.
California, so we get humidity here, but not like you do, and not like places
Yeah.
more humid than
We have a nice solid heat though, so you'll enjoy that. But we hope to play good hosts to you and all the other speakers.
Oh, and since there's extreme heat, that means we have to dress up in wool suits.
Oh,
Of course.
perfect. That sounds
It's the
fantastic.
true Masonic tradition.
Oh, and that's why we have the hotel right across the street for you. So if you could brave the
Awesome.
blast
Yeah.
furnace crossing the street, then you're good. Hopefully,
Yeah.
as long as the air
Great.
conditioner is up to specs.
Oh yeah, I'll be fine. It's just it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much for having me on this podcast, and thanks for having me out your way in Texas. And I'm really looking forward to meeting some of the brothers. It's not often that I get down there, so I'm really happy to return.
Yeah, absolutely. It's our honor to host you, and so I'm really excited. So with that, actually, at this point, is there anything that you wanted to mention that you may be working on that we may want to keep an eye out for from you in the future? I know you're heavily involved with Heredom in AQC right now, but is there anything else that you may have in the works?
I have some future works, but that's for me to know and you to find out.
All right.
We love some
So-
good secrecy.
Yeah, it's still in the works, and so I'm slowly developing more material for this upcoming couple projects. I don't know yet where they're going to land, but I'm not really worried about that. I have to get it down on paper. I've collected most of my materials, and it's one of those projects that one of them especially where I could keep going with it. And there are things that I'm going to have to admit in the paper that I can't locate at this moment that future researchers might be able to, or that there might be a future paper on new discoveries, because what I'm dealing with is a very large archive
Okay.
and many different facets to it, but I'm trying to piece this together. I'm working off of a previous paper for this subject, which is going to help a lot as a secondary source, but I'm going further. And what I like about when I do history, especially when I read something and the historian has said, this was left out for future historians, right? So I found a cue, maybe unintentional in this previous work, where I had more information than they may have.
Okay.
And so I can accentuate their work. It's not a rebuttal by any means. It's like I'm carrying this work on. And then when I leave it, it will be for someone else too.
Well, and Chris and I
Yeah.
were talking about this, that when you finish your paper or you finish a book, it never fails. You find something, it's like, damn it, I wish I would have had this before
Oh
I
my
published.
God. Yeah. Yeah. Or you find that weird old typo, or that should have been somewhere else in the paper. But that's the thing, is that you have to just let it go. Just let it go. It's hard. Close the file, send it, and then take
Yeah.
a while before you read it when it's in print.
Like art, it's never finished. It's just abandoned.
Yeah.
But hopefully abandoned in a good place, right? To where
Right,
it's
exactly.
coherent.
Oh yeah, exactly. Not like you dropped it before you collapsed. So,
So
well, thank you so much, my brothers.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. Brother Kendall, can't wait to welcome you. Gabriel, do you want to give the information about Texas MasoniCon? Because tickets are still available.
Yes, absolutely. So, folks, if you are interested in Texas MasoniCon, you can purchase tickets and get more information about the venue and speakers and locations and time at texasmasonicon.com. That's texasmasonicon.com. And the event will be Friday, August 2nd, and all day Saturday, August 3rd. It's going to be a fantastic time. Saturday is going to be our conference portion. We will have breakout talks all day, wrapping up with a keynote speaker. And Friday, as is tradition, we will have a festive board. The festive board usually does fill up more tightly than the conference portion does, just because meals and space are more complicated when you're doing a festive board. But we had an amazing program last year, and we hope to follow it up with a similarly good or even better program this year. And we are really looking forward to seeing everybody there. So remember, TexasMasonIcon.com, Texas MasoniCon, go buy your tickets. We're looking forward to seeing y'all there. This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
And this is Adam Kendall signing off.